Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Hello, I'm Willie from the Ozarks, and we're ready for our Lesson 79 in A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students. We're reading from the original edition here on March 20th of 2023, Monday the Equinox. Today's the Equinox. International Day of Happiness. That ought to be every day, but I guess there's an official International Day of Happiness today. National Proposal Day, whatever that is. Okay, I propose that we listen to the Holy Spirit. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. A problem cannot be solved if you do not know what it is. Even if it is really solved already, you will still have the problem because you cannot recognize that it has been solved. This is the situation of the world. The problem of separation, which is really the only problem, has already been solved. But the solution is not recognized because the problem is not recognized. So the problem is separation. Keep that in mind. Everyone in this world seems to have his own special problems, yet they are all the same and must be recognized as one if one solution which solves them all is to be accepted. Who can see that a problem has been solved if he thinks the problem is something else? Even if he is given the answer, he cannot see its relevance. This is the position in which you find yourselves now. You have the answer, but you are still uncertain what the problem is. A long series of different problems seems to confront you, and as one is settled, the next one and the next arise. There seems to be no end to them. There's no time in which you feel completely free of problems and at peace. The temptation to regard problems as many is the temptation to keep the problem of separation unsolved. Catch that? The temptation to regard problems as many is the temptation to keep the problem of separation unsolved. The world seems to present you with a vast number of problems, each requiring a different answer. This perception places you in a position in which your problem solving must be inadequate and failure must be inevitable. No one could solve all the problems the world appears to hold. They seem to be on so many levels, in such varying forms, and with such varied content that they confront you with an impossible situation. Dismay and depression are inevitable as you regard them. Some spring up unexpectedly, just as you think you have resolved the previous ones. Others remain unsolved under a cloud of denial and rise to haunt you from time to time, only to be hidden again, but still unsolved. All this complexity is but a desperate attempt not to recognize the problem. All this complexity is but a desperate attempt of the ego, the split mind, the part of you that speaks for the separation, that speaks for your vulnerability, of your aloneness. All this complexity is but a desperate attempt not to recognize the problem and therefore not to let it be resolved. If you could recognize that your only problem is separation, no matter what form it takes, you could accept the answer because you would see its relevance. Perceiving the underlying constancy in all the problems which confront you, you would understand that you have the means to solve them all. And you would use the means because you recognize the problem. In our longer practice periods today, remember 2 10 to 15 minute practice periods, we will ask what the problem is and what the answer to it, and what is the answer to it. In our longer practice periods today, we will ask what the problem is and what the answer to it. What is the answer to it? We will not assume that we already know. We will try to free our minds of all the many different kinds of problems that we think we have. We will try to realize that we have only one problem, which we have failed to recognize. We will ask what it is and wait for the answer. We will be told. Then we will ask for the solution to it, and we will be told. He wants the Holy Spirit to speak and wants us to listen. Our exercises for today will be successful to the extent to which we do not insist on defining the problem. You know, the problem is I don't have enough money, or whatever the problem you think it is. That's just think of that as a symptom of a deeper problem. We're going to get to the root of the problem and take care of it once and for all. Remember, we learned yesterday that we're going to replace miracles with grievances. Well, that's what our job should be now, is to step back and let God lead the way to the happiness that is already here. The problem's already solved. We just aren't realizing it yet. Our exercises for today will be successful to the extent to which we do not insist on defining the problem. Perhaps we will not succeed in letting all our preconceived notions go, but that is not necessary. All that is necessary is to entertain some doubt about the reality of our version of what our problems are. Just hold a little doubt about, well, maybe there is a better way to look at this. Maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe there's another way to perceive this. That's all that's required. We are trying to recognize that we have been given the answer by recognizing the problem, so that the problem and the answer can be brought together and we can be at peace. The shorter practice periods for today will not be set by time, but by need. You will see many problems today, each one calling for an answer. Our efforts will be directed toward recognizing that there is only one problem and one answer. In this recognition are all problems resolved. In this recognition there is peace. Be not deceived by the form of problems today. Whenever any difficulty seems to rise, tell yourself quickly, let me recognize this problem so it can be solved. That's kind of another way of saying, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Very specifically, if you see a problem, tell yourself, let me recognize this problem so it can be solved. We're going to be alert today to whatever takes our peace away, whatever takes our happiness away. Besides, this is International Day of Happiness. So let's be looking for being our happy self. And whenever, for any reason, an inner feeling comes to us that we don't feel happy, that's what you can apply your practice for. And in your longer practice period, take the time to ask and to be shown how's he say it? Our exercise for a day will be successful to the extent which we do not insist on defining the problem. Perhaps we will not succeed in letting all our preconceived notions go, but that is not necessary. All that is necessary is to entertain some doubt about the reality of our version of what our problems are. We're trying to recognize that we have been given the answer by recognizing the problem, so that the problem and the answer can be brought together and we can be at peace. I know we read that, but I wanted to read it again. And in these shorter practice periods for today, we will not be set by time, but by need. So be aware of your need. Keep in constant check. Still check in with yourself every 15 minutes if you're developing that habit of using your lesson every day. But this time check in to see how you feel. Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling peaceful? If not, use the lesson. You will see many problems today, each one calling for an answer. Our efforts will be directed toward recognizing that there is only one problem and one answer. In this recognition are all problems resolved. In this recognition there is peace. One problem, unforgiveness. One answer, forgiveness. Don't hold a grievance. Be not deceived by the form of the problems today. Whenever any difficulty seems to rise, tell yourself quickly, let me recognize this problem so it can be solved. Then try to suspend all judgment about what the problem is. If possible, close your eyes for a moment and ask what it is. You will be heard and you will be answered. Okay, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And I want to tell you about another out of Seed Savers Exchange, red salad bowl lettuce, which is, what is that? It's I wrote it down, a Lactuca. I'm trying to remember that. That's the genus, Lactuca, for the lettuces. And sativa is your species. And the red salad bowl, it says, introduced to U.S. gardeners in 1955, decorative upright plants, 6 inches tall and 14 to 6 inches wide, 14 to 16 inches wide. Beautiful deep-lobed bronze leaves are crisp and delicious, one of our best performers, bred by the Desert Seed Company of El Centro, California, very slow to bolt, a loose leaf. And if you're interested, there's 28,000 seeds in an ounce. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading, and I should have told you where we're at, but we're finishing up we're in chapter 8. We're not going to finish the chapter, but we're going to finish up section Roman numeral 10, the acceptance of reality, and that's in the Journey Back chapter. And we'll start in paragraph, let's pick up in paragraph 97. No mind can believe that its will is stronger than God's. If then a mind believes that its will is different from His, it can only decide either that there is no God or that God's will is fearful. Wow. The former, that there is no God, the former accounts for the atheist and the latter for the martyr. Martyrdom takes many forms. The category including all doctrines which hold that God demands sacrifice of any kind. That God demands sacrifice of any kind. So if you believe that God demands sacrifice of any kind, that's the martyr mentality. Basically, the premise below that is that you fear God because you think you're different. You can't think that you're better, so you have to think that you're worse. Okay, all these premises we want to look at. That's why we got to take these quiet times and let the Holy Spirit have something to work with, a quiet mind, so He can teach us. Or she can teach us, however you'd like to think about the Holy Spirit. Martyrdom takes many forms, the category including all doctrines which hold that God demands sacrifice of any kind. Either basic type of insane decision will induce panic, because the atheist believes he is alone, and the martyr believes that God is crucifying him. Both really fear abandonment and retaliation. But the atheist is more reactive against abandonment, and the martyr against retaliation. Boy, it's just amazing to understand that someone's thought through this and explaining it to us. Thank you so much. I say that to the author of the book, which I see as Jesus very clearly. The atheist maintains that God has left him, but he does not care. He will, however, become more fearful and hence very angry if anyone suggests that God has not left him. The martyr, on the other hand, is more aware of guilt and, believing that punishment is inevitable, attempts to teach himself to like it. To like the punishment that's inevitable. We're learning that we don't have to think that punishment's inevitable. The truth is very simple, that no one wants either abandonment or retaliation. Many people seek both, but it is still true that they do not want them. Can you ask the Holy Spirit for gifts such as these and actually expect to receive them? The Holy Spirit is totally incapable of giving you anything that does not come from God. His task is not to make anything for you. His task is not to make anything for you. He cannot make you want something you do not want. When you ask the universal giver for what you do not want, you are asking for what cannot be given, because it was never created. It was never created because it was never your will for you. The universal giver, another good name for the Holy Spirit. Paragraph 99. Ultimately, everyone must remember the will of God, because ultimately everyone must recognize himself. This recognition is the recognition that his will and God's are one. Let's read that again. Ultimately, everyone must remember the will of God, because ultimately everyone must recognize himself. This recognition is the recognition that his will and God's are one. In the presence of truth, there are no unbelievers and no sacrifices. In the security of reality, fear is totally meaningless. To deny what is can only seem to be fearful. Fear cannot be real without a cause, and God is the only cause. God is love, and you do want him. This is your will. Ask for this and you will be answered, because you will be asking only for what belongs to you. Paragraph 100. When you ask the Holy Spirit for what would hurt you, he cannot answer, because nothing can hurt you, and so you are asking for nothing. Any desire which stems from the ego is a desire for nothing, and to ask for it is not a request. It is merely a denial in the form of a request. A denial in the form of a request. The Holy Spirit is not concerned with form at all, being aware only of meaning. The ego cannot ask the Holy Spirit for anything, because there is complete communication failure between them. Yet you can ask for everything of the Holy Spirit, because your requests are real, being of your will. Would the Holy Spirit deny the will of God? And could he fail to recognize it in his sons? 101. The energy which you withdraw from creation you expend on fear. This is not because your energy is limited, but because you have limited it. This is not because your energy is limited, but because you have limited it. You do not recognize the enormous waste of energy which you expend on denying truth. What would you say of someone who persisted in attempting the impossible, believing that to achieve it is success? The belief that you must have the impossible in order to be happy is totally at variance with the principle of creation. God could not will that happiness depended on what you could never have. 102. The fact that God is love does not require belief, but it does require acceptance. It is indeed possible for you to deny facts, although it is impossible for you to change them. If you hold your hands over your eyes, you will not see, because you're interfering with the laws of seeing. If you deny love, you will not know it, because your cooperation is the law of its being. You cannot change laws you did not make, and the laws of happiness were created for you, not by you. 103. Attempts of any kind to deny what is are fearful. Attempts of any kind to deny what is are fearful, and if they are strong, they will induce panic. Willing against reality, though impossible, can be made into a very persistent goal, even though you do not want it. But consider the results of this strange decision. You are devoting your mind to what you do not want. How real can this devotion be? If you do not want it, it was never created. If it was never created, it is nothing. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? 104. God, in his devotion to you, created you. God, in His devotion to you, created you devoted to everything and gave you what you are devoted to. Otherwise, you would not have been created perfect. Reality is everything, and therefore you have everything because you are real. You cannot make the unreal because the absence of reality is fearful, and fear cannot be created. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Wow, as long as you believe that fear is possible, not that you experience it, just even that you think that it's possible, you won't be a creator. Well, we want to take our place among the sons of God as creators, our true state. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Opposing orders of reality make reality meaningless, and reality is meaning. And the last paragraph to finish this section today. Remember then, this is 105, remember then that God's will is already possible and nothing else will ever be. Remember then that God's will is already possible and nothing else will ever be. This is the simple acceptance of reality because only this is real. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And if you do distort reality, you will experience anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic because you're trying to make yourself unreal. When you feel these things, do not try to look beyond yourself for truth can only be within you. So when you're feeling panic, next time stop and say, well, he says, because you're trying to make yourself unreal. Let me back it up. When you feel these things, he lists these things, anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic. When you feel these things, because you're trying to make yourself unreal. When you feel these things, do not try to look beyond yourself for truth can only be within you. Say, therefore, Christ is in me, and where He is, God must be, for Christ is part of Him. Wow, isn't that nice? Christ is in me, and where He is, God must be, for Christ is part of Him. And I think we'll just go ahead and we're going to sing our little song to close today. And in so doing, I think I'm going to throw that little verse in with our lesson today. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Remember what you do in your longer 2 practice periods. He says to ask what the problem is and what is the answer to it. And then he says, just have an open mind. Let the Holy Spirit, don't define the problem yourself. Let Him show you the underlying, the one problem you're going to find that's always connected, that you can take care of all the problems with, is this idea that we're separate, that we're alone, that we're not cared for, that God's not by our side and a very present help in time of need. That's our problem. We're not accepting that. That's a Bible verse. God's a very present help in time of need, and I think that's out of Isaiah. Is that Isaiah? I'm not remembering it. Okay, well, and then throughout the day, let need be the guide. Throughout the day, just look for any disturbance and tell yourself, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And if you have a specific problem you're working with, say, let me recognize this problem. So how does he say it? Let me recognize this problem so it can be solved. Let's make sure we're tuned still. Yeah, close enough there. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved, Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved, Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Christ is in me, and where He is, God must be, for Christ is part of Him. Let me recognize the problem, so it can be solved, be solved. Let me recognize the problem, so it can be solved, be solved. Be looking for all those problems today, and let that be the thing that lets you know that when you make a problem, or when you see a problem, be sure that you instantly tell yourself, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And then take a few minutes quietly. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And be sure to let need be your guide for your shorter practice periods today. Be aware of how you feel, and when you feel a loss of peace, apply the lesson. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And if possible, close your eyes and ask the Holy Spirit for guidance, direction, and help. And try to turn over an unforgiveness, a grievance, to get your miracle. A new way of seeing, the way that God sees. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved.